Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the history of evolution. Today we shall start with the account of the flood. The evil in the world continued to get worse until God had to destroy the inhabitants of the earth with a flood. When the flood was over, Satan began to work on Noah's descendants. The story of evolution continues in Genesis 9:22, quote, "And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brethren without," end quote. Ham, instead of doing the wise thing of covering up his father's nakedness, went out and laughed about it to his two brothers, evidently. This resulted in a curse being placed upon Ham's son, Canaan. Ham's pride caused him to try to make his father look bad. People who are always cutting down others are usually motivated by pride. They think making someone else look worse will somehow make themselves look better. The story continues in Genesis 10. The people had been commanded by God to spread out and replenish the earth. Some decided instead to rebel against God's authority and exalt themselves. Genesis 10:8-9 says, "And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord." The word "before" in that verse means in the face of the Lord or against the Lord. Nimrod's rebellion against the Lord caused him to begin construction of the Tower of Babel. We see this tower mentioned in Genesis 11:1-9. "And the whole earth was of one language, and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they all have one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and therefore confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth." This tower represented man's desire to exalt himself to the seat of God. The pride of the rebels caused the people to want to disobey God. They wanted to stay together and build big cities, even though God had commanded them to spread out and fill the earth. Babylon was one of the first cities built after the flood. It still exists today. People reluctantly spread out after God judged them by confusing the languages. At this point they spoke all different languages because the Lord confounded their speech. I'm sure for several generations they told stories about how it used to be in the good old days, when there was just one big city and everyone was one happy family. As we trace the history of evolution, it becomes slightly confusing at this point because there are going to be several branches on the tree. I will focus on just two of the main branches. When the people left the Tower of Babel, they took their false religion of evolution with them. They still hoped they could exalt themselves to godhood. For the sake of the study, we shall call them the Eastern and the Western branches of evolution. In the European community, actually in the area of Asia Minor in the country of Turkey, we have the Western branch of evolution. In the countries of China, Japan, and India, the Eastern branch of evolution developed. The branches actually developed simultaneously. The flood was about 2400 BC, which makes it about 4400 years ago. The Tower of Babel was probably built within the first 300 to 500 years after the flood. Let's just assume that it was about 1900 BC when the Tower of Babel was built. The people were scattered from the tower. Many of the people in their pride still tried to find some way to believe in their own God. This is the basic motive behind evolution. For the next several hundred years following the Tower of Babel, there were many evolutionary-type myths passed down from generation to generation. In the year 640 BC, a fellow named Thales was born in Asia Minor. At some point in his life, he began the first of the modern evolutionary doctrines. He said that man had evolved from animals, animals had come from plants, Plants had come from inorganic elements, and all of these had come from water. Anaximander, one of the students of Thales, enlarged on this theory slightly. Anaximander lived from 611 to 547 BC. He taught Pythagoras, who was famous for the Pythagorean theorem used in mathematics. At this point, there was a split in evolutionary doctrine. One group became atheistic and said that there was no God. Pythagoras started a group that became pantheistic. He said that there had to be a God based on the design he saw in nature. But the God that he saw was the God in nature. The idea of a limiting God to the natural elements is the underlying theme of pantheism. He lived from 580 to 489 BC. He believed that nature is divine. There are basically 3 types of religion in the world, and we shall talk about these 3 types of religion in the next installment of the history of evolution.